For a century, electricity was invisible. It was the one utility modern economies never had to worry about. Now, demand is rising faster than at any point in the last decade. AI facilities draw power equivalent to small cities. Transport, heating, and industry are shifting onto the same grid at once. The infrastructure carrying it was built for a world that no longer exists. This electricity crisis is not approaching. It is already here, and the forces behind it are still accelerating. Global electricity demand is no longer following the slow, predictable path that defined the last century. According to the International Energy Agency, worldwide consumption rose from 23,500 terawatt-hours in 2015 to 27,000 terawatt-hours by 2022, an average annual growth rate of about 2.6%, outpacing global GDP. This is not a temporary spike. Projections through 2030 show demand accelerating even further, with the IEA's latest baseline expecting a 3.6% yearly increase from 2026 to 2030. The old assumption that electricity would remain a silent background utility no longer fits the data. What's driving this surge is not just economic growth, but a structural transformation in how societies use power. The steepest increases are coming from emerging economies. China alone is responsible for roughly half of the global demand growth through 2030, while India and Southeast Asia together account for another 15%. These regions are still industrializing and urbanizing, bringing hundreds of millions of people and businesses onto the grid for the first time. At the same time, transport, buildings, and heavy industry are all shifting toward electrification, making electricity a central constraint for economic development. The question now facing policymakers and engineers is what happens when the world's energy systems, built for a slower era, are pressed by this new and widening demand. A new kind of electricity customer has arrived, the hyperscale cloud and artificial intelligence operator. Unlike traditional office buildings or even earlier data centers, these facilities draw power at a scale that rivals major industrial plants. Since 2018, the amount of compute dedicated to AI training and inference has increased more than 15-fold, and with it, the appetite for electricity has soared. The sector's expansion is not measured in kilowatts or even megawatts, but in continuous draws of 100 to 200 megawatts per site, sometimes peaking above 250 megawatts. That is enough to match the round-the-clock consumption of a city of 300,000 people. The capital behind this surge is equally outsized. Between 2022 and 2024, the leading cloud and AI companies have committed over $45 billion to new data center construction, with the vast majority of this capacity being built in the United States. These are not marginal additions, they are dense, permanent loads that require dedicated high-voltage connections and often trigger multi-year grid upgrade projects. In practice, this means that electricity demand is no longer just a function of population or economic growth, but is now being driven by a handful of concentrated, power-intensive sites. The question facing utilities and regulators is no longer whether the grid can keep up with generic growth, but whether it can serve these new digital factories at the pace the tech sector demands. In 2023, global electric vehicle sales reached 13 million, pushing the worldwide fleet past 20 million. This surge is changing not just how much electricity is used, but when and where. Evening charging now creates daily spikes, and fast charging corridors along highways can draw as much power as a small data center, up to 10 megawatts for every 10 kilometers. By 2030, projections show 150 million electric vehicles on the road, making these new demand patterns a permanent fixture. Europe's heating is shifting as well. Electric heat pumps, now in 12% of homes, are set to reach at least 30% by 2030. Unlike gas or oil boilers, heat pumps transfer much of winter's heating load onto the grid, pushing seasonal peaks higher and running steadily through cold months. Industry is also transforming. Steelmakers are replacing coal-fired blast furnaces with electric arc furnaces, while cement and chemical producers adopt electric kilns and electrochemical methods. These industrial loads run around the clock, requiring reliable, uninterrupted power. The World Steel Association expects 70 gigawatts of new electric-based capacity by 2030, comparable to the needs of entire countries. The grid now faces more peaky, seasonal, and persistent demands, each reshaping its daily and yearly rhythm. The challenge facing electricity systems is no longer just about generating enough power. It is about whether that power can actually reach the people and industries that need it. Across much of the developed world, the physical backbone of the grid, that is transmission lines, substations, and transformers, dates back decades. In the United States, the average age of a distribution transformer now exceeds 35 years, with many units operating well past their intended lifespan. Transmission corridors, especially those built in the post-war boom, are often over 60 years old. This aging infrastructure limits flexibility, making it harder to reroute or expand capacity in response to new patterns of demand. The problem is compounded by how slowly new grid projects move from planning to operation. Large-scale interconnection requests, for example those from data centers or renewable energy developers, now face queues stretching 3 to 5 years, sometimes longer. The number of projects waiting for grid access has soared, with over 10,000 active requests in the United States alone. Meanwhile, in Europe, congestion hotspots have become a fixture of grid planning. The ENTSO-E transmission planning. Outlook identifies over 800 gigawatt kilometers of constrained corridors, especially where renewables are abundant but demand is concentrated elsewhere. These bottlenecks are not simply technical, they reflect a system where permitting, land use, and regulatory hurdles delay upgrades and replacements, turning grid congestion into a chronic constraint. The result is a growing gap between what can be generated and what can be delivered, making the grid itself a central bottleneck for economic growth. Germany offers a clear demonstration of what happens when electricity delivery falls behind generation. Over the past decade, the country has built up around 70 gigawatts of wind power, mostly concentrated in the north. Yet the industrial south, home to the bulk of Germany's manufacturing and population, remains the primary center of demand. The high-voltage corridors designed to bridge this north-south divide, Südlink and Südostlink, were supposed to be operational by 2022. Instead, a combination of lengthy permitting, environmental assessments, and local resistance pushed final approvals into 2025, with actual power flows now projected for 2027 at the earliest. The consequences are measurable. In 2022, roughly 4 terawatt-hours of wind and solar energy were curtailed, power that could have been used but had nowhere to go. The Bundesnetzagentur estimates that congestion and curtailment cost the German system about 3 billion euros that year, with direct revenue losses for renewable plant operators running into the hundreds of millions. These are not just technical inconveniences, they represent real economic drag and missed climate targets. Germany's experience shows that building new generation alone is not enough. Without matching investment in transmission, even the most ambitious clean energy build-out risks leaving power stranded and progress stalled. When electricity systems reach their limits, the consequences are immediate and tangible. In February 2021, a historic winter storm swept across Texas, pushing the grid to the edge. As temperatures plunged, nearly half of all generation capacity, more than 52,000 megawatts, became unavailable. Freezing conditions crippled natural gas, coal, and even some nuclear plants. With demand outstripping supply by roughly 33 gigawatts, reserve margins vanished. Operators had no choice but to order rolling blackouts, cutting power to over 140,000 customers and leaving millions in the dark for hours at a time. The crisis was not abstract. It was measured in lost heat, frozen pipes, and lives disrupted. A different kind of limit was reached in the United Kingdom during the winter of 2021 to 2022. Here, the grid stayed online, but price signals did the damage. As global gas prices soared, wholesale electricity costs spiked to £335 per megawatt hour, more than triple the typical rate. Regulators raised the household price cap by 54%, pushing average annual bills to nearly £2,000. For more than 12 million households, energy affordability became a daily struggle. Fuel poverty rates climbed, and millions faced the choice between heating and other essentials. These crises, one of reliability and one of affordability, stem from the same underlying stress. When the electricity system falters, the effects ripple outward, becoming economic and political problems with real human costs. Permitting reform for transmission lines stands out as the most direct way to address the grid's delivery bottleneck. Long approval timelines and complex land use rules have left new high-voltage projects stalled for years, even as demand surges. Streamlining these processes could bring essential new capacity online faster, closing the gap between where electricity is generated and where it is needed most. At the same time, grid modernization is beginning to move beyond slogans. Utilities are deploying advanced digital controls and sensors, giving operators real-time visibility and the ability to respond instantly to shifting loads or unexpected outages. Storage technologies, especially large-scale batteries, are being added to absorb excess renewable generation and release it during peak hours, while cross-border and regional interconnectors help smooth out local imbalances. Managing demand is no longer just about asking consumers to conserve during shortages. Smart charging for electric vehicles and automated demand response programs allow large users to shift or defer consumption, reducing strain during critical periods. For the largest electricity customers, data centers, industrial plants, and electric vehicle charging corridors, utilities and regulators are starting to require coordinated planning, integrating these loads into grid expansion strategies, rather than treating them as unpredictable afterthoughts. Flexible workloads, particularly in the digital sector, can be scheduled to run when supply is abundant or prices are low, reducing the need for costly new infrastructure. These responses are not a tidy solution set, but a practical toolkit for a system under growing pressure. The critical question now is whether these measures can keep pace with the accelerating demands of a world that increasingly depends on electricity for every sector of modern life. Electricity now defines economic advantage and exposes vulnerability. The International Energy Agency projects global demand will rise by over 25% by 2030, yet grid investment lags far behind. How societies respond will determine which economies thrive and which stall. The age of invisible power is over. The real challenge starts now.